Hi, so here we are again to talk about the media as we know it today, and whether it is worthy of being called the media in the sense of independent journalism. When Shabnam asked me to speak on this issue, my first reaction was no, because one wasn't even really sure whether one should be talking about something which is now non-existent, especially when you look at it at the cacophony every night of anchors or persons who call themselves journalists and who are doing little but spreading hate, distrust, suspicion against targeted groups, individuals, people, calling for people to be hung, calling for war, calling for trials, public trials, supporting vigilantism. The point is that these are all the issues that journalists across the world, not just in India, all of us were raised and joined the profession to question. That journalism as the fourth pillar of democracy in India was here to question governments, to question authorities, to question police, to question power, and to speak for the poor, the underprivileged, the harassed, the victimized. But over the years, and this monster was not created yesterday, this monster that we see every night unleashed upon us in the form of television channels is not an overnight creation. It has come over the years, over the decades. And it is very important to realize that, because in that realization, perhaps at some point, there will be corrective measures. I know it's very, very easy for us to go back to the emergency, and then we talk about how censorship was first imposed. This was government censorship imposed by Indira Gandhi. But for me, the lesson was not what the government did, because we've gone through a whole bunch of these governments doing various things against the media in different forms. For me, what was very important as journalists who entered journalism just after the emergency was the manner in which the journalists, the newspapers, kowtowed to that authoritarianism. There was no attempt, except for a couple of publications and a few editors, to actually challenge that censorship, to come together, to rise, and to say, no way, we are not going with you. Nobody did that. They all succumbed. And it was only after that censorship was lifted that suddenly there was that period of the 1980s where journalism was suddenly very, very proud of, or very sensitive about its independence. So in that sense, we grew up in journalism in really the golden era. Golden era where journalists, all those editors who had kowtowed suddenly had developed a conscience, or they were trying to atone for their guilt. And they all came together and they decided that no more. So as journalists, I remember we were out on the streets all the time. We were protesting, we were talking, we defeated various bills. Gundu Rao, who was the chief minister of Karnataka, brought in a press bill, and we all protested and he had to withdraw it. Similarly, in Bihar, Jagannath Mishra, another Congress chief minister, brought this in and he also had to withdraw it. At the press gallery in Parliament, we would strike work if any journalist was not spoken to well by one of the leaders. We walked out of press conferences, we walked out of police headquarters. It's just because the dignity and the respect that should be associated with journalism was not being followed. Our editors who trained us, who threw us into the field to learn, with, of course, the do's and don'ts and responsibility and accountability, all bywords now in journalism, but at that time they were really hammered home. And they told us that you don't stand up for anybody. You only stand up for the President of India because he represents or she represents India and the flag. You don't stand up for prime ministers, for ministers, for others. They're all elected representatives. I mean, this is not mandatory. You can, you cannot, but this is not a mandatory thing. And this is how we were taught to question prime ministers, ministers, do what what was the fundamental task of journalism, to report from the bottom up and not from the top down. In the 90s, when television came, and big money came with it. Along the way, the governments in power, and believe me, all were the same at that time. You couldn't differentiate in their attitudes towards the media as we proceeded in those days. And they decided and they realized that they could bring in censorship through the corporates. They realized that we, the media, the beast that had been unleashed after television and big money and all these media houses that had emerged, they were so greedy that you could feed us bones. And those bones were in the form of fat salaries for editors. Those bones were in the form of advertisements, of cash, of kind, of gifts, of houses, of trips, of travel. All that came with that power. And we succumbed. We were so greedy that we took it. And who suffered right at the beginning? And we ignored those signals. All of us ignored those signals because we were living in our little balloons. The working journalist suffered. He was removed from the wage board. The wage board was removed altogether. The guarantee of employment was banished. And journalists, who was there to protect the Constitution of India, to speak for the people of India, were reduced to contract labor. Top editors were brought in on contract labor to be hired and fired according to the proprietors. There was one big newspaper where the third floor became the management floor. It was like the big brother watching the journalists. And young reporters, middling reporters were fired without a moment's notice. Contracts were not reviewed. When management passed, say, in television stations from one group to another, 200 or 300 journalists were just sacked. They stood outside, I know, in one case, and were not even allowed to go back the next morning into the office to pick up their belongings. Editors, even editors who had kowtowed with the management, were fired. One came back to a major print newspaper to find a notice on his door saying that he doesn't need to report anymore and he's been done with. So this was a constant. We didn't retaliate. The unions that did speak, I remember in the Indian Express, the union was strong. And whenever workers were being thrown out or were not being given their dues or not being looked after or were not being given the respect that we as journalists insisted, the union would take it up. Unions were slowly divided and broken into bits by managements, which had the whole power of the cooperative and the business house behind it and the power of the politician. And slowly the unions disappeared from view. And the journalist, the working journalist, was left on his or her own to fend for independence, to talk about journalism as a real profession. So the slide down had begun a long time ago. It's just been perfected now, to the point that all these anchors that you see on what we call media, what we call journalism, which is why I was reluctant to speak about it, because this is not journalism. I still have that passion and still that kind of respect for journalism to realize that this is not journalism, and to know that this is not journalism, and to say that this is not journalism. When people stand over there and they talk of war when journalists should be talking of peace, when they talk of hate when we should be talking of unity and putting people together, when they talk of targeted groups and they go after them with the kind of viciousness that we have been seeing over the past weeks, years, months. This is not journalism. These are bigots, and this is rabidity, which passes and masquerades as journalism and doesn't inform the viewer who goes to it like a drug addict every night to watch these shows, and doesn't inform him or her that this person who is on that screen bringing hate into the environment and spewing venom is being paid a hefty amount for it. It's not free. There's no charity. When that person tells us that we must have war and that our soldiers should go to the borders, that person's sitting in his suit and his tie in the safety of a studio. So these are all creations and creatures of the nexus between governments and the corporates. These are people who do the bidding of the rich and the powerful and protect them. Yesterday, when in Bandra, all the migrants, and I really have written today that I think migrants is becoming a racist slur in its own way. The way we are using it, the way we are using it to brand people, human beings, workers, daily wage earners, people who are running our homes, people who are running our factories, people because of whom our cities are actually functioning. Those now have become these migrants to be hit and beaten. And I was shocked because I don't usually watch television, but I was told that this had happened, so I switched on one of the channels that was breaking this news, and found this person, supposedly a reporter of the channel, who'd put together a couple of people, obviously had not gone into the masses, had not gone to speak to them, had not asked them questions as to why they had gathered at Bandra, and spoke to one or two, and when they tried to tell her that, look, we want to go home. What do you want to go home for? She says. We are staying at home. We are facing all this. Why do you have to go to home? Or why do you have to go home? You're so irresponsible. How can you be so irresponsible? I mean, this is journalism. And this is what they're peddling out to us. You're not even training those people who you give mics to and cameras to go and report. You tell them to question the poor. Actually, you are actually training them, because you're telling them to question the poor, to hang them, to lynch them, not to give them a chance to speak. But when it comes to authorities, when it comes to corporates, when it comes to people with power, who we in the business are there to expose, you take them and their version and you push it down our throats. And then you say you're journalists? Since when has journalism been defined like this? Since when did this profession come about and came into existence to do what these people are doing every night? I mean, it's like saying a lawyer is there to basically defy the law and to reinterpret the law and to say that there is no law and I'm going to do whatever I want, like Bolsonaro in Brazil saying I'm going to do whatever I want. And I don't care. And this is my thinking, and this is how I'm going to do it. So this is what these people who are on the media are doing. So it's extremely important for us, one, to speak out against this, two, not listen or watch them. It doesn't matter. They'll get their crumbs, they'll get their bones, they'll get their dog biscuits from the guys who own them. Let them get that. But don't give them that kind of credence and then say that you are encouraging independent media and that you're doing it because of journalism. This is not journalism. And in the process, you're doing such a grave damage to the democracy that we as a free independent media were here to protect. Democracy, equality, justice, liberty. We every night are trying to take that away. And we're trying to take that away from all the people and actually make it just so that a handful of the people who we serve are the people who are left with all the, the spoils of democracy, whereas the people who are the democratic vein and artery of India are smashed in the process. So I really feel that we are not even at a crossroads anymore. Till about a few years ago, I would say we were at a crossroads. We could bring in remedial measures. We could do something to correct the course. I really don't know what we can do today. I think the media is free independent media is under attack. People who should speak up are not speaking. Everybody who says what the authorities want them to say are the ones who are being lauded. The ones who don't are the ones who are being persecuted, hounded, harassed. And the situation is literally becoming worse all the time. I mean, like Malcolm X said, I mean, the worst is when the people who are oppressors start feeling that they, start projecting themselves as the oppressed. So I think we really need to, I don't have any solutions at the moment. I think our solution is linked with solutions for India and how India moves forward. But even so, I really strongly believe that no matter what course India steers, even if, say, tomorrow you had this very benevolent government, somehow when the media is controlled, it is very, very difficult to get it out from under those controls. Because every politician who comes to power knows the importance of handling and controlling the messenger. And that's what they've been doing throughout, in different ways. It's not that the government yesterday was not doing the same and not destroying this, not doing its little bit to destroy this pillar of democracy. It was doing that. It was doing that yesterday, it was doing that the day before, and it's doing it with more viciousness today. And obviously, if this continues, with even more viciousness tomorrow. And then we have this bunch of guys and women on every night and through the day, twisting facts, projecting facts in a completely biased and discriminatory manner, saying things that are so against the truth, speaking for people who are just a small fraction of this country, dismissing look at it yesterday. I'll just end with this, but look at it yesterday. When the first few hours of reporting the manner in which the poor of Bombay had come out to go back home, the kind of suspicion that you saw, the kind of distrust, the questioning, it was amazing. And it was being done by the journalists. It was not even being done by the politician. Not the journalists, but these people who come on every night. They were the ones who were doing the questioning, not even the politicians to that extent. And then they converted it into a center versus state fight. And nobody was saying, why did those people gather there? Now it appears that it was the same television channels who had told them that there were trains that were going to be run, and they came because of that. And now they are arresting the guy who spread those rumors. But what about the 15 lakh tickets that the railways have issued? Why is it that responsible people were not out there saying what they needed to all the people? What is this thing of social distancing, which we were so horrified about when we were reporting it, without understanding that there are 10 to 15 people in tiny cramped spaces? Why can't we give them trains to go back? That social distancing, which they don't have of anyway, which only the rich have and the middle class cowering in their rooms, in their apartments have, they don't have it. So why are we not, as journalists, asking the right questions? We're here to ask the right questions. It's only because when we ask the right questions and the proper informed questions, and we hold governments accountable, and we hold the opposition accountable, and we hold people who run this country accountable, that we are going to be able to bring in remedial measures. This is, we can be always lampooned, and there'll always be trolls who will tell you that this is not journalism or that is journalism. But this is not for you to say this is journalism or for me to say it isn't. It is there, it's verified. We've been there in decades in this profession. It's a beautiful profession. It's a powerful profession. And I don't want to damn the profession because of a bunch of people who are running television stations today. So I do hope that the way out is for you as citizens to be better informed, not by watching television, but by reading news, and not reading news from one source, but reading it from all over. What has excited me is the ability of the citizen to get out the news even faster than we do and bring it out in a perspective. So there is that movement forward amongst younger people particularly, which is very, very heartening and which is amazing. It's the youth, say, between the ages of 18, 19 onwards till 30, 35, they're the guys who are really coming out with the news now and who are challenging the system by immediately questioning what is obviously fake news. And I think we have to continue with that. Use information as a weapon and use that weapon to question not just the authorities but also the media. Thank you so much.